for all those people who are actually compelled to attend a Saturday languages school, such as Arabic school, it seems like your parents' efforts have actually paid off.
Arabic is the most commonly spoken language after English by young people in Australia, a study has revealed, with about 1 in 8 multilingual children actually using it at home. So those of you who do speak Arabic at home, you've suddenly become one of the biggest statistics in Australia.
I think it's not just a statistic, but it's just an asset, honestly, to have. You know, when you're young and your parents ask you to speak Arabic at home or whatever language you're from, and you kind of get a bit, you know, let me just speak English. But you realise when you get into the workforce and, you know, that it's just an asset to speak another language.
Yeah, it gives you an edge.
Exactly. In the majority of industries, I'm pretty sure it is a competitive advantage. You can deal with others, and a lot of organisations are taking up a multilingual approach. So they're teaching their staff how to deal with people of diverse backgrounds. So it's an advantage to speak Arabic. Not just, you can't just become a translator, I mean, but you can engage and...
Yeah, I was actually having this discussion with a friend the other day, and we were talking about how, surprisingly, Australia, as compared to other countries, doesn't really have a strong focus on teaching other languages in school. I mean, like in year 7 and 8, you might have a little bit of French, a little bit of Italian, but you never really get taught a language strongly enough to use it.
That's right.
In the future, whereas in other countries, for example, English is usually always taught, or perhaps French or German, or, you know, some other language that, you know, like we said, gives you that competitive advantage if you want to live outside of your country, or even if you just want to work in a transnational sort of corporation or business.
Not just that, even going on a holiday, like even if you go back to your parents' country just for a holiday and, you know, your language speaking techniques are horrible, you realise, like, oh, I should have listened, you know?
Yeah.
It's just an asset, and, you know, like, language is the key to cultures, and it opens up.
It's a good from political perspective, it's actually beneficial. I mean, Kevin Rudd spoke fluent Cantonese.
That's right.
And Mandarin. And Australia's relations with China during his Prime Minister period was very healthy. So.
And like, you know, when the sheikhs come, not the sheikhs, sorry, when the politicians come on Eid and stuff, and they all start with Salam Alaikum, and it's like, okay, can you say something else? Like, I think, you know, that is one of the icebreakers. When someone is able to speak your language, you bond with them in a different way.
And considering that Australia is a country that contains people of many different ethnic backgrounds, it's always a really good thing if you can speak more than one language.
So our listeners, go give your parents a hug for teaching you a different language.
And Arabic school definitely paid off.
The Y Factor.
And now on to our strange law.
In the state of Alabama, boogers may not be flicked into the wind. It's illegal.
For all those nose boogers out there, don't go to Alabama. You won't be able to practice your favourite pastime.
That's right. If you pick your nose, you might see yourself in a jail cell for the rest of your life.
The Y Factor.
That was the end of the news segment for this week.
Stay tuned for our feature. We'll be talking all about reverts and their experiences.
We'll be back right after the break. You're listening to the Y Factor on 87.6 FM.
Stand alone. If Allah's by my side, I am not afraid to stand alone. Everything will be alright. I am not afraid to stand alone. Gonna keep my head up high. I'm not afraid to stand alone. If Allah's by my side, everything will be alright. Gonna keep my head up high.
Welcome back to the Y Factor, guys.
And that was Mohamed with yet another one of his wacky accents.
Yeah, he's totally lost the plot, hasn't he?
So while you're filling in for him, why don't you introduce our guest for today?
Well, our guest today, her name is Kerri Lewis. She's been a revert for 2 years, and this is our special segment this week. We're going to talk about reverts and hear about her story and some of the challenges she faced embracing Islam, whether her family was accepting. We're going to talk about all these issues and really thrash them out, inshallah. Kerri Lewis, welcome to the program.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam, rahmatullah, welcome. So, as far as we know, you're 22 years of age, you live in Bankstown, but you didn't grow up in Sydney?
That's correct. No, I actually grew up in Melbourne, and I moved out of home quite at a young age, but I moved straight to Sydney, and alhamdulillah, been here ever since.
Alhamdulillah. And you grew up in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne?
The eastern suburbs of Melbourne. You can sort of compare it to the Castle Hill area of Sydney.
Well, Kerri, tell us, what brought you into looking into Islam in the first place?
Well, as I said earlier, I moved up to Sydney at a young age. So when I moved to Sydney, I actually didn't know what Islam was at all. And when I first met my first Muslim friend, I was very intrigued in the sense that when they told me what Islam was, I had absolutely no idea. And so I guess that initially gave me a bit of a question in my head to find out what my friends had sort of been following, but it didn't really give me the ambition to go out and find a religion for myself. I was still sort of, focusing on work, focusing on my, social life and all that. But when I started finding out more and more about how Jesus alayhi salam was a prophet, not the son of God, that's when questions started raising in my head, but still didn't really look into it then until a couple of years later.
So you were Christian originally?
I was Christian originally, yes, that's correct. And it was funny actually with the churches that we went to. We went to a lot of different churches. I used to go to church as a kid, but then we sort of stopped going to church, and I never really found out why until I actually embraced Islam when I spoke to my father.
So you'd be confident enough to say that you weren't a victim of the propaganda of the media against Islam, the whole terrorism, playing the Muslim card in the media. You weren't that naive to believe that before you embraced Islam? Like you said, you didn't really know much about it.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, I didn't really know much about it, and that's probably because I don't watch enough news. Nowadays I do, but like I said, I didn't really know much about it, and so my mind wasn't tainted with all these bad images. And so when I did find out about Islam and started finding out bits and pieces, because I found out the good first, it really didn't affect me in any way, alhamdulillah.
Kerri, you're talking about your father and how you used to go to church as a child. What happened in that scenario? You just mentioned how they completely changed their views. What was that?
Well, what happened was, like I said, I only found out about this recently, but my father and my family, we used to go to church as a kid, and I used to go to the kiddies' church around the corner, and we all of a sudden stopped going, and I thought it was because of sports or, prior engagements or whatever, but I actually found out that my father, it didn't sit with him well that they've changed their views. So they went from the Old Testament, and they basically said, okay, now this is the new one that you follow, the New Testament. And so questions were raised in my father's head as to how can you just change all of a sudden all your views and everything that you've been following to something else that's just come up out of nowhere. So we've stopped going there, and hence why religion was never really a major thing after that in our family.
But in the church, did they say who gave the authority for that change? Like, was it a pope order, or that church just decided to change their views?
I think they combined with another church, and I don't think they really just threw out all their old views and just completely accepted new views. That doesn't make any sense. But I do know that, things were modified, and I think some people were a bit upset. So it doesn't... I don't know the details of it, but I just know that it didn't sit well with my father. And alhamdulillah, my father has always been very strict in the sense that he believes that there is a God, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
But whether, the religion that he was on is the truth or not, he can't really settle with. He believes that, religion, it can't be run by man, so hence why the questions were run in his head.
Yeah, so that must have paved the way for you when you started questioning and reading into another religion?
It did. Well, like I said, I only found out afterwards, but what I think it did do is that because it wasn't such a major issue in my life, going to that church over and over and over again, I wasn't really blinded by the views. I actually had the ability to be able to make my own choice, and alhamdulillah, hence why I found Islam. And like I said, when I found Islam, I was a Christian before, so I did go back and look into my own religion before I looked into Islam.
So when you moved from Melbourne to Sydney, is that the first time you sort of engaged with a Muslim? You encountered a Muslim?
Yeah, well, that's correct. When I was living in Melbourne, I was under the influence that it was just Christianity. That was it. And when people would ask me, are you Christian, are you Catholic, I'd just say I'm Christian. I didn't really know that much. And when I moved to Sydney, I found out there's another religion, and it's Islam. And then I found out about Judaism and all these sorts of different religions, and
SubhanAllah, maybe that says something about the da'is in Melbourne.
No, I think, technically when you live in suburbs, even us, while we're at school, before we start going to university, you don't really mix with anyone other than the same people that your family mixes with, and it's usually the same.
Yeah, and like I said, I moved out of home when I was quite young, so I was basically just around my family and my friends. I never really had exposure to anything else you don't really get exposure until you go out and you fend for yourself and you live on your own.
But that's amazing to think someone at the age of 20 has lived 20 years of her life with no contact of Islam. Fair enough from no Muslims in Melbourne.
No, I had contact with Islam when I moved out, and that was probably about the age of 17.
17, primarily majority of your life, no contact with Islam, and not even from, like you said, you don't really watch much media or gather information from the news. That's very interesting. I think there's more onus on us as Muslims to really branch out, because a lot of Muslims tend to stay in pocketed areas such as Bankstown, Auburn, Granville. We don't really spread out, and a lot of non-Muslims hold views that the media sort of portrays.
Well, on saying that as well, actually, my family did know about Islam. Obviously, they watch the news. They've been exposed to it. They've been around for however long. But I do know now, mashallah, with how the years have progressed with my Islam, I've actually looked into the Melbourne side of things, and they're actually expanding themselves. They were just in sort of their own sort of areas, but now I'm actually finding out that everyone else around my areas, although I don't really see any Muslims when I go visit my family, they're more aware of it. So, alhamdulillah, like we are branching out, alhamdulillah, but it does need to be.
Can I just ask, if you didn't really have much contact with the whole idea of Islam, then what were your thoughts when September 11 happened? Like, people starting to throw around the blame. What did you think?
Well, the funny thing was September 11 was 2001. And I would have been 12. I was I was in grade 6, and I was sick that day at home, and I seen all these planes flying and these buildings collapsing. So honestly, I have a memory of that day, but I wasn't old enough to comprehend what exactly happened.
Alhamdulillah. So let's talk about your reversion story and how you actually saw the light. I mean, you mentioned off air that you had a dream, and encountering some Muslims really woke you up. What exactly happened? Can you tell us your reversion story?
Okay, well, basically, like I said, I found out about Islam, found out about Isa alayhi salam, not being the son of God, and that was probably the first 4 years of my Sydney. And after that, I continued to, I guess, ask little bits of questions, but then I met a very special friend who then gave me an English version of the Quran and also a book called The Sealed Nectar. And that was the biography of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when I actually picked that book up, I was actually sitting at home and sort of thinking about myself, thinking about what I was doing with my life. And I guess I just was lying in bed and picked up the book and started reading it. And mashallah, that book, I could probably say changed my life. I read that book. I read how much of a great man the Prophet, our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, and that raised questions. So when I started reading and I started listening to different lectures, asking questions, my friend was always there to help me. Then, maybe 2-3 weeks afterwards, I had a dream where I believed that, Allah was showing me that this is the right way. And a lot of different things that happened in the dream sort of became reality, and it allowed me to see that, Islam was the right path.
Wow. And you didn't have any qualms about believing the dream? Like, didn't it freak you out a little bit when things started coming true?
It did, but what helped me was that a week prior to that, subhanAllah, I was listening to a lecture about dreams. And I was listening to how, you can tell you good dreams, you can't tell you bad dreams, you can, certain dreams can mean certain things. And I was sort of procrastinating with the idea about reverting to Islam, and I didn't really want to tell anyone. And so when I actually had that dream, it was like, okay, if I don't do it now, then it's never going to happen. So I just sort of opened up from then. It took me about a week to be able to tell my dream to someone, because I was afraid I wasn't allowed to, but then I remembered that I could. But it was very straightforward. It was basically saying, Islam. Islam is right. Choose Islam.
This is fascinating. I mean, in retrospect, looking back, did you find the Quran, the English translation of the Quran, more effective or more sort of appealing to you, or the sealed nectar, which was, like, as you mentioned, you really felt, the love for who is this man, who is this great man, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So just in future, like for Muslims out there, did you feel that if I throw automatically the Quran, we know how powerful it is in the verses and what they contain, or a book about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his biography, his story, his life, is that more effective? What did you feel?
It's funny you asked it, actually, because I had a sister that was asking me that recently. She knew someone that was reverting to Islam, and she wanted to know which ways were the best ways. Alhamdulillah, it's always good to have a version of the English Quran, but when I first picked it up, I didn't understand it. Like, it's all in beautiful poetry and its stories chopped and changed.
Very complex language.
It is. It's a complex language, and so I think with reading The Sealed Nectar, it allowed me to understand some of the stories that the Quran was trying to tell me. And I needed to understand hadiths. I needed to understand, the stories of all the Prophets to be able to understand certain surahs and certain reasons as to why things are halal and why things are haram.
And for you to grasp that, you need something that's appealing. And like you said, that drove your passion to read more into Islam.
The signs of the Day of Judgment was one thing that really scared me. That was straight after.
Scares all of us.
Yeah, that was straight after the Khalid Yasin CD, and I think because I seen a lot of reality in these signs and I seen it happening in front of me, I was like, okay, this is it. This is what I'm supposed to be doing.